Welcome to the Colorful Clipboard, where we discuss the building blocks of making dough in childcare. I'm Kate.
And I'm Carrie.
Welcome back to Colorful Clipboard, and boy, has it been a crazy few months. And as a podcast, we sometimes record our podcasts and update them and post them later than maybe when we recorded them. And today, Carrie and I decided that we would take some time and actually do a current events and a now what. And so we're going to start by kind of looking specifically at those childcare programs or after school programs that have their calendar coordinated with the school district calendar. And in our current world of pandemic, what this means and how this looks, and our take, may not be your take, but our take on what that means to you. So, Carrie, tell me a little bit about some of the programs you've worked with and some of the struggles they're currently going through and why.
Well, I think one of the things that has been really hard for people in the past couple of weeks is for directors and teachers to see how wound up the community at large is about the concept of the teachers in elementary schools and high schools, and I guess middle schools. Nobody mentions them, but I'm going to presume there as well. How much risk they're at by putting all these children back in the building with them, and how those same people were not super concerned about the health of the childcare workers who were being put back in a building with hundreds of children. And part of it is, a difference in scale. A high school is going to have, several thousand kids, or at least 1,000 kids. And I don't know of any childcare programs that have 1,000 kids at one location.
But there's also, and there is the component of, how many kids are in a classroom. I mean, some of these high school classrooms have 30 to 40 kids. And that's not generally the case in a child care
but it
program.
might be in an after-school class, school-age classroom.
That is true, but it's summer, so some summer programs might still be running at that volume. Yeah.
And I think it's been really hard for all of the early childhood and after-school professionals to hear parents freaking out about those professionals being put at risk when there was no similar uproar when childcare programs went from either being closed or being only for essential workers to being open to the general public. I think that has been, I've just heard a lot of,
but don't you think some of that's, so don't you think some of that though is, some of the concern about elementary school, et cetera, has come as a result of what they've seen related to early childcare. If early childcare opened and there wasn't a problem, we may not have these concerns. But, even in Texas, we've got, 400 cases that are coming out of childcare?
More than that. Yeah. It's increasing by about 100 cases a day.
Yeah, so we've got 100 cases a day in Texas specifically related to childcare COVID. So unfortunately, we're the guinea pig. I don't think anybody thought of it that way, and I don't think that was the intent.
Correct.
But that's what's happened,
And the fact that most states don't do what Texas does and track infectious disease specifically in childcare. So in Texas, we have to, if a person gets sick with a reportable communicable disease, the childcare center has to not only report to the health department, they also have to report to licensing. So licensing has a good account of how many people have any communicable disease in childcare. And that's not just COVID. It was also, the case for amoebic dysentery. If you have a child who gets sick with amoebic dysentery at your childcare center, you have to let licensing know.
Or a staff person who has a positive TB test.
Right. All of that, it is infrastructure that has been there, but other states don't don't track childcare separately. They just track the ages of people. And so it's just done through the health department. So I think the numbers in Texas are frequently being cited in national news, but it's not because we're not doing a good job. It's because we are doing a really good job of tracking it because we have this different infrastructure than most states do. And the fact that, there is a director who I have been in awe of during all of this, who has done absolutely everything she can possibly think of to keep COVID out of her center. And she ended up having to close her center for a brief period of time while they were waiting for everybody to get testing back because one of her staff members got tested positive for COVID. And so her decision, not the health department's decision, but her decision was to close the center until all of her staff could be tested. And then, during that time, have professional people come in and do disinfecting at the center. But it wasn't shown to be, there was nobody else associated with the center who had it. That person contracted it outside the center. And because of all of the precautions they were taking at their center, nobody else got COVID. Everybody was wearing masks. They were changing clothes when they got to work. They were changing shoes when they got to work. They were doing pods of children, all of the things that the CDC says to do, they were doing. So they were doing more than licensing required. And still, with all of that, they had somebody come down with COVID.
Well, but that's because the staff don't live in a bubble. I mean, that's one of the things, and you and I have talked about this before. It drives me crazy is, we're going to associate, whether it's, in a school district or a traditional elementary school classroom or even in a childcare center, we're saying these people got COVID because of that reason, but it's probably not. It's whatever they were doing outside. They aren't telling people you get to go to work and home and that's it.
Right. And so that's what I think, we have to keep in mind is that, like I said, if this could have happened at her center where they're taking every precaution, it's not just about what's happening at the school.
Well, exactly.
It's much
in this
more.
Case, it's not.
In her case, it was much more about what was happening outside the school.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say is, so if they're doing everything internally and you end up with somebody and you catch it quickly, like, you used a great example, they're able to mitigate the risk. But if the staff don't view their life as basically home and to work, and they're going out to parties and they're doing other things that they view as socially distanced or safe or low risk, but then they're coming back to work, then it's no longer the bubble, or it's no longer, you're doing triple the work because you're not just trying to keep your center clean. You have to account for where your staff was before.
Yeah. And I think as we're going into all of this stuff with the school districts and the different state mandates and the federal mandates about school, whether or not those will hold water, I don't think the federal ones will. But the state mandates, you've got state education boards saying, okay, all of the schools need to do X and Y, but if that area has an outbreak, like I live in Austin, Texas, and we're having an outbreak, and the state school board said you can only take 2 weeks to figure out how to do all of your safety precautions on site. So after that, you have to have on-site school. And our county health officer just issued an order saying no school can be held in our county until at least September 9th, which completely countermands what the state was saying. And if you're a center that bases your calendar off of the school district, what are you supposed to start when they go back to distance education or when they go back to in class? Are they going to be taking snow days? Like, what is the calendar going to look like? Because school in my county, every school district was supposed to start in 2 weeks.
Well, within 2 weeks. So there were some school districts. Yeah. So some school districts in Travis County were starting like the 13th and 14th of August or that part of the week. And then others weren't starting for 2 weeks later because they've adjusted their school day.
Right. They had
to start a little bit earlier and end a little bit later. So they were making up their
minutes.
days or time,
yeah,
their minutes that
but
way.
what they had as their published calendar, if you looked at the published calendar in, March, they had published calendars for the 2021 school year. There was a published calendar. Those have all been kind of scrapped.
Well, and so let's think this through. So as the director of a child care center, and one of the roles that we have when we train directors is we help you with planning. So whether we're talking your marketing plan, your menu plan, your curriculum plan, I am sure I would not be the only director right now in a complete, like, I can't plan anything. So I want to make sure that I take a step back real quick and kind of play the other side, or another view, which is, not only do we have to figure out how to work around the school district calendar, if that is what you work, and whether or not you're going to do virtual, but it's also what is the true community need, because I can't stop but sit here and scratch my head that all of a sudden we have all these families who have had, children home all summer that was probably not originally planned. And now the parents are being told, oh, again, you have to be home for another 2 to 3 or 4 weeks from when they thought they were planning to be able to maybe go back to work.
Yep.
So I think that every child care center that's listening really needs to think through their size, their relevance. The homeschooling community, which really there's homeschooling and then there's schooling at home. But the homeschooling term is being used interchangeably, which as a longtime homeschooler frustrates me because it's not. You're schooling at home.
Yep.
But that's a whole different podcast.
That's distance education, not homeschooling.
Yeah. So we have all these families that are now finding themselves, that didn't prepare over the summer. Had we known in May that these families were going to school from home in August, I'm sure that a lot of these families would have done a lot of things differently, from maybe setting up spaces, or getting computers or technology or Wi-Fi that can handle 3 kids and 2 parents, all doing school and work from home.
Yeah. I mean, how many programs have a T1 line?
Yeah.
How many homes have a T1 line? I think, I had a hard time last night. I was doing a training through Zoom, which we've all gone to enough Zoom meetings, but I was trying to do a screen share as well as show my face, and the amount of bandwidth I have at my home was not enough that my husband could do whatever it was he was doing in another part of the house. I presume he was Netflixing. He has, been watching a lot of anime. And I couldn't have the bandwidth I needed to do a screen share on Zoom while my husband was watching a movie. So if I had 3 kids who were all trying to attend Zoom meetings, and then I was trying to work and my husband was trying to work, I'm just not going to have the bandwidth for that. And
in a lot of ways, the bandwidth for that, not just the technical.
Yeah. And, the centers that are thinking about, okay, we're now going to offer full day care for school-age children who are doing distance education, I have to ask you, do you have a T1 line? Do you have do you have enough, infrastructure, not just the computers, but the amount of literal bandwidth to be able to have those 10 school-age kids doing the distance education that is now being required? Because what they're asking in most areas of the country is very different from what they were doing in April.
Right. So let's talk about this real quick. So I want to make sure that people kind of heard what you said. So there are some programs that are trying to stay afloat. They're trying to see what their community needs. And they have found that there is still a need for parents to have a place for their kid to go. So if the kid is not being able to go to the free public school, now there are private child care centers, preschools, academies, whatever name you have on your facility, that are opening up space that is 6 feet and will provide a service For lack of a better term, it's not really teaching. You are supporting
You're
the
being a proctor. It's much more like
exactly.
you're being a proctor in a testing center. But I've also heard of it from gyms. There are
Hmm.
dojos and dance studios that are doing this also.
Yeah, so everybody's having to reinvent what they're going to be able to provide and what their clients need. So whether you're an after school program or a full-time, pre-K program, know that you don't need to have a licensed teacher for these. So if you've decided this is a service that your parents need, and generally I'm saying you're probably offering this to kids or to families who are already in your program that have an elementary, middle, or high school. And we'll talk a little bit about that middle school, high school thing here in just a minute. But at least the elementary school kids, you don't need to have a licensed teacher. You aren't setting up a private school. That's a whole different. That's a whole different podcast.
Well, but I
But if
think
all you're trying to do,
I think some programs are probably going to do that also.
well, that's what I said. I think that's a different podcast because I think that is something to explore if it's something that's relevant to your community's needs. So, from a marketing standpoint, a rebranding standpoint, to figure out how to make your business viable in this time of change, yeah, absolutely. You can be a proctor service. You can become a private school and hire a certified K-5 teacher. But I just wanted to make sure that if you're basically providing a space for people to do their schoolwork, you understand that you aren't expected, should not be expected to hire and pay somebody with a teacher credential who would normally be a K-5 teacher.
Right, because they already have that because they're doing the distance education. They have a certified teacher. And I think it's kind of interesting. I think part of why here in Texas, the governor has now said that he is going to require the TEA to change their state rules about how many days of distance education is because of the number of teachers who said, if you're not going to actually provide the PPE, is the loan, PPE, personal protective equipment, and you're not going to put up, sneeze guards and stuff like that, we're retiring. And he got letters from literally tens of thousands of teachers who said, this is not good enough and we're not coming to work.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have teachers all over that are talking about the PPE, that are talking about their own well-being, that are trying to figure out how they're supposed to manage, because not every school across the state of Texas. And so if you're listening to this podcast from outside of the state of Texas, you may not have a real true idea of the scope of the size of this state. I mean, it can easily be chopped up into 5 normal state sizes.
Or if you're from New England, about 20 states.
Yes. So consider some of the rural areas that you might have in your state, and know that Texas probably has about, 4 or 5 times the number that you might have in your state. So we have a lot of areas that just are still technically not there, right? So, I mean,
Yep.
there's between Austin, Texas and Houston, Texas, it's about a 3-hour drive, but there's a good hour in the middle of that, yeah, they have cell phone service, but that's about it. Like, they do have some internet capacities, but not enough that you can stream a movie, and not enough. I mean, because there's nothing but farms out there. So, an internet provider doesn't see this as necessarily. So a lot of them are using phone hotspots.
Yep.
So, think about what you can do as a family with your phone hotspot if you are, I'm not going to say in the middle of nowhere, because some of these places are fairly decent sized towns, but they just don't have good internet. And so I think that is something, the digital divide is something that we hear about. There's a lot of major school districts that started loading up their buses and sending their buses to, again, apartment complexes and different places in their communities for these kids to be able to access the work in the spring. And again, nobody thought this was going to go into the fall. So nobody has prepped their infrastructure. Yeah, there's a lot of libraries now that are boosting their signals, even though they're not open. So you can at least do something in the parking lot.
But are you going to want elementary school kids sitting on the ground in the parking lot of the elementary school for 7 hours a day?
Or in Texas heat, let's be realistic.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of things component, right? And so you're you're still assuming that these families have somebody to take them somewhere. So that is where we as childcare providers come in to fill the gap. But we have to understand that families were budgeting for this to be free.
Right.
They or maybe they were paying their after school program.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
And I think also, so now whoever administers the child care block grant in different states, they're now having to wrestle with, okay, if a school age child who is receiving federal funds to pay for their child care, if they're there all day, even though the schools are theoretically open, does the CCS payment, are they paying part day or are they paying full day if those kids are there all day? And, I know that our state child care block grant entity has not yet come to an understanding. There is a lot of strong feelings on both sides, because you've got those low income families, those single parent households where they've got 4 kids and the parent is an essential worker and they can't stay home with those 4 elementary school children, but 2 of them are in kindergarten and 2nd grade, so they're not really old enough to stay home. So how does the child care block grant address that situation where they've got kids who are receiving funds, but the parent, maybe that kindergartner has severe asthma, Well,
what
are they going to do?
We do have to, right. So we do have to remember when we're talking, as child care centers, you really, really have to make sure you understand the expense. So if you're hiring somebody full time to help facilitate this, and you have families that are on some sort of federal assistance or can't pay what I would call camp rates, because really at the most you could be charging people during this time would be whatever you might have traditionally charged for camp.
Or if you have private, some schools have private kinders, so you'd be charging that same rate at most.
And so you really have to kind of think through, although this sounds like something that's a great alternative and it'd be a great way for you to figure out how to be of use to your community, I'm going to sit here and tell you to run the numbers. I love the fact that we have childcare centers that are willing to and want to provide services and provide this kind of service, but I'm concerned. I really am concerned that you're going to end up not being able to cover, because you can't put 45 kids in a classroom. So usually I'm all about the school age program, because school age program, the number of staff to child ratio makes an after school program quite the moneymaker. But currently, can you really do that in a COVID world? I mean, can you put the number of kids that would, quote unquote, fall under a single teacher in your school age space?
Yeah.
And it still makes sense financially. So please, please, please run the numbers, people. Please make sure that before you embark on this, you really have a need and understand it's temporary. This may or may not be something that's going to be a good thing for you for a whole school year. So if it's only something you need to do for 3 weeks, is it worth the additional expense, the setup, the bandwidth, or do you just encourage the families to bring the kids sometime after lunch, and that they plan to do their school works in the morning? I mean, it's really hard to tell.
I also talked to a center about basically doing 3 rotations of kids through the day, so that you're open for 12 hours and you have the school age classroom and you have 10 kids in there for 3.5 hours. Then you have a half an hour to disinfect the room, and then you have another group of kids in there for 3.5 hours, and then you disinfect the room, and then another group of 10 kids in there for 3.5 hours, and you disinfect the room. And that gives the parents who are working from home or are working an essential worker job, that gives them 3.5 hours where the kids are somewhere else, they're supervised, they know that they're getting their education done, and if the person who's filling in the other part of that day, their neighbor, their grandmother, the other parent, whoever it is who's taking the other 4 hours of that 8-hour workday, has a break and they can do their life also. That's another, so you're basically doing school age, so the same number of hours you would do in a normal after school program, you're just doing it 3 times in the day with 3 different groups of 10 kids.
Yeah, so definitely think through all your options. if this is something or a strategy that you're contemplating, feel free to send us an email. Tell us what you have found that might work for you. Hello@colorfulclipboard.com is the email to send us your feedback, your questions, because we would love to hear from those programs that feel like this is right, programs that maybe have struggled, or just if you have general questions. We're trying really hard to provide valuable content, but also not be a podcast that every single week we're going to talk about everything that's going on. So if you listen to us early on, we definitely had some definite early COVID-19. But if you haven't listened to us, I mean, this is episode 21. So we've got, 20 other episodes out there. Hopefully you've gone back and listened to them. And we would love to have you share your feedback, share the podcast on social media, and don't forget we do have Facebook page, we have an Instagram. I think that's it.
Yep. I mean, I think we could, should we tell them just a little bit about what are some of the episodes we've had? Like, what was last week's episode? Do you remember last week? I know that was a long time ago.
You're funny. Yeah, so last week we talked about the importance of benefits and understanding benefits versus giving away free childcare to your staff. We've talked about having special days and how to do curriculum around Talk Like a Pirate Day. We've even helped you from hiring, how to give tours. We've got some stuff coming up in the future. We're going to talk a little bit about how to schedule vacations and what a nightmare that might be. We've also talked about writing scripts for the phone. So, I mean, we've got some great stuff coming up for you. And we've done some, I think we've done some of the neatest podcasts. And we were doing this before COVID, but we launched it during COVID. So don't forget to go back to the ones that were pre-COVID.
Yep.
Because some of those people haven't really checked out, but they're some of the best ones. So, and of course, I personally like our test run one, which was my soapbox about t-shirts.
Yep, I think that one was a lot of fun. I'm a huge fan, of course, of the one about special days, all the ones about staffing, and the one that we talked, episode 12, which was all about parties at your program for your families. I think, figuring out how to do those, having celebrations at your program is going to be important to rebuilding the sense of family and community at your center. But, now we have to keep the numbers down. Okay, well, guys, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you again next Thursday.
Talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Colorful Clipboards. Connect with us on social media at Colorful Clipboard or send us an email to hello@colorfulclipboards.
Send us your voicemail with your own questions and stories. If you want to keep learning with us, visit Texas Director, where we continue to have seminars, licensing, programs, and more.
This show has been made by me, Carrie Casey, and Kate Young with assistance from Hallie Casey and Marie Young. If you learned something today, share the show.